And how is everybody doing today? Welcome back to Psychology 150 after the long break. It's good to see everybody today. Hi, April. Good to see you. Jordan, good to see you as well. Let's say Tsunami Quake. Nicholas B, by the way. That's okay. I like Tsunami Quake better. You should have told me that the first day of class. I could have called you that. Fantastic. It's good to see everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So before we get started today, let's see, what time is it? Can anybody tell me what time they have on their clock? It's sort of weird. I've got two laptops and a phone right in front of me, and they all have different times, and I'm not sure why. One says 10 o'clock, one says 9:58, and the other says 9:59. Are we at the time to start yet? 10 a.m. Okay, sounds good. I tell you what, before we get started, I want to send you one quick short news clip from 1947, I believe it is. It is a short 37-second newsreel, and I'm going to send it to you through the chat bar. If you would, take a quick look at this, and then when you come back, we'll talk about it a little bit. So there you go. Does everybody see that in the chat bar? Go ahead and take a quick look at that. And we'll wait as other people filter in. Hi, Amber. Good to see you. John, good to see you. Jordan Smith, good to see you as well. Good to see you as well. All right. So I just sent around a video. If you've just come in the room, I sent around a video in the chat bar. It's a 37-second video advertisement for a brand new product. Holy cow. Take a quick look at it and tell me what you think. We're going to go ahead and get started back in lecture here in a couple of minutes. If you've seen the video already, check back in on the chat bar and let me know so I can tell if I should get started or not. Okay. Looks like my CPU usage is acceptable at this point, but I will go ahead and close out a couple of windows just to make sure. There we go. Got that. Okay. Kind of interesting to think about the invention of the computer, right, Nicholas? You folks have grown up in a time where computers are ubiquitous. They're on your phone. They're in your computer games. They're at work. They're at school. They're in public libraries. You just can't get. They're in fast food restaurants now. You just can't get away from them. But there was a time when nobody had thought about this thing called. Nobody had been able to figure out how to create one of these thinking machines. And it had a huge impact on the field of psychology. Now, for the next week, we're going to be talking about cognitive psychology, or what I like to think of as the information processing approach. And this thinks of humans as human computing devices. Now, this movement sort of coalesced from a wide array of psychologists, including linguists, psychologists, artificial intelligence people, anthropologists, all sort of were doing disparate stuff that was very dissatisfied with behaviorism, and they sort of coalesced around the invention of the computer. Now, the cognitive revolution was inspired by the dissatisfaction with the behavioral approach. If you remember that video I sent to you last week in webinar, where B.F. Skinner was asked about free will, and he said that there's no such thing as free will. In a sense, what he was suggesting was there was no internal control over the processes that we engaged in. So there was no, in a sense, no mind, no operator that was evaluating and making plans based upon input and sending out output. And so the invention of the computer sort of birthed this idea that it was finally acceptable to come together as a real science of the study of human mental processes. And the cognitive psychologists were very interested in using scientific methods not only to prove that the mind could be measured, but in attempting to measure gradations of mental activity. So it was based on this idea of the computer. What do computers do? Well, they receive input, then they process that information, and then they produce output. You know what? Humans do the same exact thing. They encode information, so you're out there searching your environment, taking in information. We know that you store and use this information, and at some point you're asked to retrieve and produce output based on that information. So you can think about computers and humans as having very similar properties when it comes to using and processing information. So the invention of the computer provided a huge metaphor that sort of created a science we now call cognitive psychology. Now there is old school psychology didn't care so much about explaining their theories using neurological evidence because the methods hadn't been developed in the 60s and 70s in the United States and around the world to measure neurological processes. All the machines that we think about today, these PET scans, these MRI scans, and these other high detailed activity and structure scans didn't exist in the 60s and 70s. So cognitive psychologists didn't worry about that. But now that we've got that equipment, there are actually people who are blending biopsychology with cognitive psychology into a new approach that tries to not only understand how and why humans think and process this information, but how it could be related to brain activity. So we're going to talk about both of those today. Okay? Now, here's the thing. If you think about the mind, if we can make some assumptions that you have to encode information to act on it, that you have to store it in your mind while you're functioning, using it, and that you're producing output or retrieving the appropriate behavior based upon these internal machinations. Okay, if we assume that all the three of these things happen, then we can begin testing. We can begin testing these assumed processes to figure out what's going on in the human mind. So there's a model which which explains sort of in broad swaths how the mind works. And so you can think of your mind as having three basic processes. Now we put them as boxes so that I can talk about them. They're not abstract things, but they're really not necessarily places in your brain. Instead, they represent sort of the the order of how information is processed in the mind. And what Atkin and Schifrin argued is that human beings have a part in their mind where they filter out irrelevant information and just don't even pay attention to that. They call that the sensory memory. Then there's a part of the mind where information is at while you're actively thinking about that information, and they call that the short-term memory. And then they assumed since we are able to recall facts from the past and act on those as pieces of information when they're brought up into our consciousness, that we must have this thing called a long-term storage. And so you can take a look at this model that I have right here. And what it suggests to you is that the first part of the human memory system is deciding whether or not we're even going to pay attention to something. Do you folks remember the when we did the dancing bear experiment a couple of weeks ago? How many of you did not see the dancing bear? Raise your hand in class for me. Hey, hey, what's up? Good to see you, Ron. Hi, Allison. I'm waiting for some responses real quick to see if we remember that video. I don't know if y'all remember that from last week. Did any of you? Yep. Okay, there you go. You didn't. All right. Well, here's the thing. It was actually filtered out at your sensory memory. If you think about it, human sensory systems receive a ton of information every moment of the day. And what we have to do is find a way to sift through the mountains of sensory information to pick out just the stuff we want to pay attention to. And so you can think of the first part of the mind as sort of a filter, if you will, that decides what you will and won't pick out of your sensory experience. Now, there's sort of an interesting experiment that demonstrates this, and I want you folks, this filter that we have is actually not inborn into us, but is trained through experience. So you have learned that when I ask you to look for something in white, that you shouldn't pay attention to things that are in black. Well, you've learned tons of other rules that guide how you pay attention to the world that you're looking at. I hope this makes sense, but it will after this demonstration. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flash to a screen in a minute with a simple reading task. I want you to read 30 words. Now you're going to read them in normal English style, okay, left to right, top to bottom. The words don't necessarily have any grammatical sense. They're just a list of words, but you're going to read left to right, top to bottom. Now here's the key. I don't want you to read the word. Instead, I want you to read the color of the ink that the word is printed in. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So instead of saying Atkinson, I would say black. Instead of saying short, I would say white. Does everybody understand that? Okay, here we go. Ready, set, and go. Okay. I'm sure that's long enough for most of you, so I'll wait for your feedback. How many of you had trouble reading the color of the ink that the words were listed in? I'll bet a lot of you really had trouble with this. And this is because your sensory memory acts as a filter. Instead of letting the color of the ink come through, it wants the semantic information. So instead of saying red, black, yellow, you wanted to say red, yellow, yellow, red, purple. I'm confused by my own puzzle, right? It was difficult, wasn't it? Okay, very good, right. And so what that proves is that you have this filter at the beginning of your consciousness that selects out what it is you're going to pay attention to. We call this the sensory memory, okay? And information lasts there very, very short amount of time that you get to pay attention to it. And then if you decide it's not important, your brain totally loses that information. Now, information then comes into this thing we'll call our short-term memory. And that's what you are thinking about right now. Now, some of you have probably been to EMT training and may think of short-term memory as your memory for the last day. I don't want you to think of it that way. I want you to think of it as what you are thinking about right now, holding in your consciousness at this very moment, what you are rehearsing, we would say. So if you're listening to the words and thinking about the words that I'm saying, you are rehearsing my words in your short-term memory. Okay? Now, I remember we just did that list of colored words. See, now that was in your long-term memory because you remember that we did it. But now it's back into your short-term memory because we're talking about that list of colored words, right? But I could change the conversation and talk about anything. And then what's in your mind at that given time is what's known as your short-term memory. I hope that was confusing enough, right? Okay. So what's in your short-term memory that you are actively thinking about? um, is what we're talking about right now. Now, it turns out that probably the most famous paper on this was published by a fellow named George Miller, who is sort of the leader of this thing we'll call the cognitive revolution in 1956. And he demonstrated that people have a very limited, what he'd call memory span, which is the amount of things that you can hold in your mind at any one given time. Have any of you ever been given a list of words to get, a list of things to pick up from the grocery store? How many of you have ever been asked to pick up something from the grocery store from your family members? How many of you have ever been asked to pick up more than one thing from the grocery store from a family member? Well, you know what? It turns out there's a limit to the number of things that you can actually keep in your mind when you're walking into the grocery store. How many items do you think you could remember, John? Ron, how many items do you think you could remember if I gave you a list of things to pick up in the grocery store? Right? How many, right? Let's see what we can do. This is only 15 words, okay? This is 15 things. See how many things you can keep in your mind. Here we go. You know what? I need you to stop by the grocery store for the party that we're having this weekend, okay? If you could, I want you to pick me up ice cream, donuts, salad, carrots, Advil, onions, potatoes, uh, pasta noodles, Tylenol, apple pie, chocolate cake, bell pepper, rice, dog food, and Motrin. Okay, go ahead and type in the chat bar the number of words that you can remember from that list, just as many as you can. I don't expect you to remember all of them. There's no way you could. But see how many you can type in. We'll see who gets the best. Okay? Now, your short-term memory is your conscious awareness. Typically, we say it's limited to 7 plus or minus 2 items. We're going to find that out today. How many items are you able to type in the chat bar at one time? We'll see. Now, stuff is on your mind only as long as you are rehearsing it. And then your long-term memory is what we would call your memory. So if you actually get to the grocery store and remember the Tylenol, you lucky dog, um, uh, then it must have been in your long-term memory. And we think about the long-term memory as the place where we store facts like who George Washington is, or what countries are in Asia, or what 3 times 2 is. These are all memories. Let's see what we got. Amber's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Amber's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Allison's got 1, 2, 3, 4. So we got 4 through 8. Pretty interesting. This guy, George Miller, suggested that people's ability to remember a list of words is somewhere between 5 and 9 items. And look at that. We've got 4 and 9 items. Let's see. Do we have any other people who want to add? One, two, three, four, five. Oh yeah, Amber, you're the high scorer there. One, two, three. I didn't have carrot tomatoes, Yan, but Yanan, but I can see where you were going. One, two, three, four correct by Yanan. Nice. That's hilarious. I'm impressed with everybody's performance in the class so far. John beat me. Yeah, unfortunately, wait a minute, did he? One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. You had nine as well, didn't you? Oh, no, you had eight. Wow. Not bad, though. So we had nine, eight, like six, and a couple of fours. Well, this is what we would call your short-term memory. Now, whether or not you can actually put stuff into your long-term memory and remember it depends upon how you encode that information into your long-term memory. And it depends on what we would call your rehearsal strategy. Oh, okay. Actually, let's talk about that first. First, let's talk about increasing your short-term memory. You can actually increase your short-term memory if you want by learning how to put things into categories. Actually, let's ask a question. How many of you remembered ice cream? Wait a minute, hold on. Let's see. I had one ice cream, two ice cream. Okay, I had two ice creams. You weren't ready. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, and Motrin. How do we have Motrin? One Motrin. And how many pasta noodles did we get? Zero pasta noodles. Okay. So what you demonstrated was what we call the serial position effect. All right, the ice cream was the first word on the list, and two out of the seven of you actually remembered that. That was the first word on the list. Motrin was the last word on the list, and one of you remembered that. Not quite as good as the first word, but you know, Motrin's not as exciting as ice cream, in my opinion. But you still each out of nine responses, we registered one of those words. Pasta noodles was exactly in the middle, and none of you got pasta noodles. So you demonstrated what's known as the serial position effect. When you ask people for a list of words, they tend to remember the words you say at the beginning of the list and the words you say at the end of the list, but not the words in the middle of the list. But yes, you can categorize these words to increase your memory, and that's what's known as chunking. So here's actually the list of words that I made up. Uh, Tell me if this wouldn't have been a little bit easier for you. Ice cream, cake, pie, donuts, salad, carrots, bell peppers, onions, pasta noodles, bread, potatoes, rice, Advil, dog food, Advil, Tylenol, Motrin, right? What would you have done? Okay, there you go. April chunked the medicines together. Okay, exactly. And you know what? I probably went a little too fast, folks. When I get in this exercise, and especially when I'm online, I always get a little bit too quick. Um, but so Oh my goodness. There we go, PowerPoint. So, did you folks sort of see the value of chunking? Now, what you can learn to do to really get to help yourself improve your memory is to get in the habit of chunking things. Actually, chunking is a cognitive habit. It's a skill that you can learn, practice, and make better. So, really, it's not like you can't achieve a good short-term memory if you want to. Now, IQ tests actually evaluate the size of your short-term memory. And on an IQ test, which we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks, they call it your digit span. Your digit span. You can actually look on the IQ test, and about row 11, it'll give you a score for the digit span. And what they're testing is the size of your short-term memory. Now, how do we improve our long-term memory? The first thing we have to understand before we can really get into techniques of improving the long-term memory is to understand that really the quality of the memory depends upon how we process the event. Okay, so if you see something, if you perceive something and bring it into your short-term memory, but don't think very deeply about it, or don't think about it using the right strategies, that memory trace may be faint and go away after the item leaves your mind. In which case, you don't get a strong long-term memory, and it's harder to act on that information. So in order to create a long-term memory, what we need to do is to understand that how we think about information when it first comes into our consciousness is what's really going to improve our memory. So if you see, maintenance rehearsal is when we just look at things and just try to remember them at face value. So if I gave you the list and you just tried to stick them into your memory one at a time and repeat them over and over as you put new items in your memory, you were going to have great failure. That's because you were engaging in maintenance rehearsal. What you have to understand is that information is stored into the mind in terms of these things called schemas, which are knowledge structures. So you folks sort of had an intuitive understanding that I was asking about vegetables, starches, desserts, and somebody even figured labeled medicines, right? I picked three famous medicine brands because I put one in the middle, one at the 2/3 of the way through, and one at the end. And interestingly enough, you didn't get the one at you got the one at the end. Um, but yeah, so you understand that things are organized in your mind in these categories. So when you see things, what you need to do is good rehearsal involves associating the things that you see with the things that you already have in your mind. And we'll call this type of rehearsal elaborative rehearsal. And this understands that you keep things as schemas in your mind. And so what you do is when you see something, you ask how it compares to the schema that you have. All right, or relate it to a schema that it has. So if a friend, if you meet a new fellow, and his name is Forrest, his last name is Forrest, Mr. Forrest, and he comes in wearing a god awful red sweater, and you might think, wow, that sweater looks like a fire truck. Instead of trying to remember his name Forrest, you might try to put together the idea of a forest fire and his bright red fire truck coming to put the forest fire out. And so what you would be doing is you would be relating his name to an image that you have in your mind of fire trucks fighting forest fires, fighting fires. Okay? And so what you're going to do is you're going to try to relate stuff. So this goes even beyond categories. So categories is an easy way to do it, and I'm glad some of y'all noticed, but sometimes you have to go out of your comfort zone and actively create these categorizations. This is what we call elaborative rehearsal. Okay, so you actually have to go out of your way. Life's not always going to fit into these easy vegetable dessert categories. You have to actually figure a way out to create associations in your mind, right? So if you this picture right here is in your book and sort of gives you a summary, if you will, of the Atkinson and Shiffrin modeling of information processing. So they talk about sensory, short-term, and long-term storage. Those are sort of the scientific names that we use to talk about attention, deciding to pay attention, paying attention, and remembering, if you will. And so the function of the sensory memory, remember I suggested to you, is a filter. Um, the short-term storage is where you actively come up with intellectual and rational and sometimes irrational strategies that help guide your conscious behavior. And your long-term storage is where you store information that may be of potential use to you in the future. So all of you know what 3 times 2 is. As soon as I said that, the number 6 popped up in each and every one of your heads. Where did that information came from? It came from the long-term information, the long-term storage. So if you look at this chart, it's going to tell you how long information stays there and its capacity. And I'd like for you to just have a general idea of how each of these memory stores works. All right. So how to improve your memory. I can't tell you how many students tell me that they have a bad memory. That is the most common complaint that I get from students. Well, Dr. Roddenberry, yeah, school's hard for me because I just don't have a good memory. Or I've just got other things, I just don't have a good memory, is what they tell me. And you know what? The idea that you are born with a good memory is not true at all. It is simply not true. Memory is just like any other ability, just like any muscle you might have. It's something you have to work on. And the first time you played a game of checkers or the first time you tried to ride a bike, you were not very good at it. And the same thing happens with memory. A lot of people really don't understand that it's a developed ability, and instead of working on it, they try to avoid situations where they will need it. And this is not what you should do. Okay? Now, probably the earliest fellow that studied memory was way back when the behaviorist was in power, and is a fellow named Hermann Ebbinghaus. And he demonstrated this really nifty thing called the forgetting curve. And what he demonstrated was that you forget about half of everything you learn within the first hour. Think of that. If I teach you something an hour from now, unless you're still thinking about it, if I come back an hour from now and ask you what you learned, if you are an average student, you will be able to remember half of it. What kind of a grade is an F? Does anybody know does anybody know what a 50 is? Yes, it's a grade of F. I answered my own question, right? And a lot of students, unfortunately, treat education this way, and they go into the classroom and they hear what their teacher says and they really, really understand it. And then they walk out of the classroom and they don't think about it anymore. And they don't really study for the test and they don't really do any preparation. And then they make a grade of 50 and they say, wow, I don't have a good memory. No, this is actually what we would call an average memory. And what Hermann Ebbinghaus found is that the only way to fix that was to go back in after the test and to study again until you completely understood the material. And then wait a little while, and you know what? Your performance would decrease again, but not as much. And he argued that in order to really learn something perfectly, what you had to do was you had to overlearn it or learn it multiple times. How many of you have honestly gone back to your chemistry notes or your biology notes and studied them 5 or 6 different times? If you do, it's probably because you're a super good student. You're an awesome student. But a lot of students don't do that. And they don't understand that just studying once or hearing it one time does not mean it's going to stay in your mind. Now, we actually talk about the hippocampus as being the part of the brain where you engage in a process of consolidation. Now, you may remember what I say for the rest of the day, but you will probably not remember what I say 2 weeks or 2 years from now. And this is because that information wasn't truly consolidated into your long-term memory. Now, we now know that the hippocampus is responsible for consolidation of memories. If you destroy the hippocampus, a person can't build new memories. So you can think of the hippocampus as responsible for that. And you know, every time you bring a memory into your consciousness, you're processing it with your hippocampus and you are reconsolidating that memory and making that memory stronger. And so, one of the main things that you can take away from this class is that if you're going to study for a test, try not to cram and study one time. How many of you, like to study in one big study session right before the exam day? How many of you do you studying that way? Can anybody own up to doing that? You got to memorize all those terms, especially in anatomy. Absolutely. I think Brian, you said you definitely have to uh, find ways to stick large bits of information into your brain rather quickly. Okay, right. Okay, well, Yanin, next time, instead of studying for 3 hours, what you need to do is if you're only going to study 2 hours, at least break it up into 2 days in a row. That works better. If you're going to study for 3 hours, which I really would suggest you do, you should study 3 days in a row for 1 hour, right? And so every day when you bring this information up into your memory again, it refreshes and reconsolidates that memory. And so this is sort of the active grunt work of improving your memory. Sort of like if you want to grow up healthy, you have to eat your peas and carrots. You have to learn how to study more times, and you have to learn how to study a little bit longer. Okay. But if you're willing to do that, there are ways that we can really enhance your memory using what we know about the brain and how it works with memory. Okay. Now, the most important part of your brain is your frontal lobe, your prefrontal cortex, because this is where you come up with what we will call your meta memory strategy, your idea for how you're going to think about something, right? So, your meta memory strategy in the bear game, in the dancing bear experiment, was not to pay attention to anything black, and that's why you didn't notice the bear. Well, when we go to school and decide to learn anatomy words or decide to learn psychology or decide to try and understand our algebra homework, we pick a meta memory strategy. Now, it's not as simple as ignore the everything black, but we are going to use strategies for processing information. And if we can learn to use good strategies, then we can really amplify our memory. So the first step is knowledge. And, you know, we can think about, and also when we bring things into our conscious, we can tie things together and we can put images together. Do any of you know the term PEMDAS? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Does anybody know that term? Does anybody know that one? Okay. So what we can do is one strategy is that you need to understand that you need to associate things in your brain. You should never think about things independently. You should always create pictures and ideas and associations between things in your mind. What's PEMDAS? That's a math thing, isn't it? I've been out of math so long, April, that I can't remember it. Okay? And so one of the things that we do is our brain, when we bring things into our conscious awareness, which is where our frontal lobe, what our frontal lobe controls, we have to understand what to bring into consciousness and how to manipulate it. And if we can do that, we can create stronger memory traces. So learn how to associate things in your mind. Now, here's the other thing. We have more space in our brain dedicated to processing pictures and images than we do words and phrases. All right. Pictures and images have been around, and colors have been around far longer than words have. So our brain has evolved to process large amounts of picture information. So really, when you want to create strong memory traces, you need to you need to learn how to combine to create pictures of the things that you are thinking about. It's the math order, and Alison Venegas shows us all up. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. Gold star for you, Allison. Send me your math teacher's name. I'll give you a kudos. Um, Very good. Uh, I didn't think anybody was actually going to know that. I'm impressed. Good job. So thinking about things as visual images is going to lead to much better memory traces. So when we were thinking about that salad, you needed to think about salad, bell peppers. You needed to think about the onions on that. You needed to think about the carrots. Those were the four vegetable items. So what you needed to do instead of thinking about those words is you needed to build that salad in your mind. There's the lettuce. It's that green, dark green romaine lettuce. And then somebody just sliced the carrots. I see the big orange carrots there. And then on top of that, how about some red bell peppers, because that would go nicely with the orange carrots. And then the red onions, which is actually purple. I don't know why they call them red. And then look at that salad that I've built. And when you stick those things in your mind as that visual image, it's hard for those things to fall out of there because it's so easy to recall an image. Okay? Now, here's the thing. You also have this structure called an amygdala. Now, your amygdala is important in two ways. It's important for emotion, and it's also very important as a directional finder in your brain. And so, if you want to really activate your hippocampus, you need to make these images as funny or as scary as you possibly can. The use of humor and vivid images will really, really, really improve your long-term memory. And then you can use the method of location. And actually, I've got a video on the next screen that I'm going to beg you to watch. I am absolutely going to beg you to watch this video. It's called the method of location. And what this gentleman does is he combines visual imagery, mnemonics, along with our strong sense of location to create an insanely powerful memory. Now, the gentleman that I've got describing it to you is just a young memory athlete uh, who's engaging in the same strategy that all memory athletes do. So, I don't know if you knew this, but there are actually there are memory competitions, and there are people who train for memory competitions. And these people who train for memory competitions are called memory athletes. And this gentleman's going to tell you the basic strategy for learning how to supercharge your memory. Okay, so here's the thing. How to improve your memory. And this is the memory is a slide. Yes, they are. That's the crazy thing, Ron. This guy is just like you. He is just like you. But what he has chosen to do is he has chosen to lift his weights and eat his vegetables. Have you ever been to the gym, Ron, and you've seen those guys or females walking around who have these insanely big bodies? Have you ever seen one of those absolute hulks at the gym? Okay, people aren't born that way. They work hard and get that way, and some of them use steroids, but the ones that look normal, right? They work hard and get that way. They're the same as you. They were the skinny kid just like you, but they chose to train a specific part of their body. And that's what you need to think of the memory as if you want to become a better student. And I know all of you would like to be better students. You A students want to make sure you have A pluses. You B students want to become A students. And those of you students who are struggling to make C's and D's just wish you could get through college and get your degree. We all want to improve our grades just a little bit. And so what we need to do this is follow this gentleman's plan and actually follow sort of systematic plans of memory enhancement. Now, this guy's going to talk about one strategy, but somebody was mentioning medical anatomy. This guy's got another video for those people who want to memorize medical anatomy or any list of things that you want to learn. There are people who have a meta memory strategy that will help you to remember those items, and it will always involve what I just described, the use of vivid imageries, mnemonics, and location to store this information. Those three human processes are fundamental to our survival, and they're so hardwired in the system that if you take advantage of these three strategies when you're rehearsing information consciously, it will stick in your long-term memory. All right. So don't tell me you don't have good memory like other people. That is not true. Outside of extreme cases, yes, there are people who are savants and have amazing, insane memories. And a lot of times these people are what we call idiot savants, and that they're extremely impaired in a lot of other areas of functionings. So yes, there are extremes of human intellectual functioning, but most of us lie within a range called normal. And there are a ton of us who have above average memory, more than would say they have above average memory. And this is because we choose not to train this muscle. Most people's bad memory is a result of underutilization and not enough practice. Memory is a muscle, so you're going to have to push it by remembering harder and harder things. Okay. And also, you need to learn the memory strategies, the mnemonic strategies that will help you to memorize things. And if you go to this fellow Luis Angel, if you go to his video series, he'll have lots of useful videos for helping you improve your memory. Some of them are monetized, some of them are not. But if you Google around, you can find the basic strategies that you can use to supercharge your memory and make learning go from difficult to rather easy. And what you do is you use the understanding of, of associations and schemas. You have to relate things together. You have to relate things together. These relations have to be funny, and they have to be visual. And if we can find a way to locate them in space, they become super strong memories. And I know this sounds crazy and like a lot, but if you can learn these simple strategies and learn to do them quickly, you can store amazing amounts of information. I don't know if that sounds like proselytizing enough. But what I wanted you to take from today's lecture is that behaviorism wasn't enough because it suggests, contrary to what we all know, that nothing happens inside the brain. There is no selection, no evaluation, no integration occurring in the brain. And we all know that. But the invention of the computer, a machine that could do that, broke down the barrier that was holding back a lot of people who would become cognitive psychologists. These cognitive psychologists then started to systematically study the way people think and remember things. And as I suggested to you, really we study three broad areas of human memory functioning. What people choose to pay attention to, that is attention, or their sensory memory, or we study what they're able to pay attention to. We study their short-term memory, or we often test their long-term memory by asking them to remember and report on things that they saw a long time ago. And in doing this research, we've built an idea, a belief that the mind is fairly systematic, though it does have its biases. These biases are systematic, and that you can think of all human beings as having basically the same intellectual framework driving their thought processes. Okay? Now, and if you have an understanding of these thought processes, you can improve your memory functioning. Okay. Um, Now, I spent all day today trying to tell you that memory is perfect, how you can improve your memory, how you can supercharge your memory. And I don't want you to lead you to the belief that memory is infallible. So, what we're going to do tomorrow night in webinar and Thursday in class is we're going to talk about areas in which our memory fails us. So we're going to talk about eyewitness identification as one of these areas. Now, I've posted a TED Talk video that I think is very interesting, that sort of explains the scientific process of, of what's going on. And then what I'm going to do on Thursday is I'm going to send you around the Ronald Cotton video, the 2020. It's the ABC 2020 program on Ronald Cotton. It's a 20-minute news story about the unlawful conviction and incarceration, the incorrect conviction and incarceration of Ronald Cotton, and how it exposed the problem with people's long-term memory and eyewitness testimony. Okay. All right. I see we have a lot of people here today. I hope I made some sense today. Does everybody, let's see. Right. I don't have a way to test you. I'd really like to test you at the end of every class to see what you understood. Did anything not seem clear today? Are there any questions I could answer before I log off for the broadcast? I guess that's what I'll ask. I promise I will have your Chapter 6 writing assignments graded by tomorrow at the latest. I am running behind and I apologize for that. Okay. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. I'll wait just a second. Sometimes questions trickle in. But if you're done and don't have any questions, feel free to log out and I will see you either Wednesday night or Thursday morning. No problem. Thank you. I appreciate you coming tonight. You have a great day too. Bye-bye. Take care. Look at all these concurrent viewers. How many people? Have a great day. Bye-bye. Take care. Okay.